Are you ready? Let's go!
Don't you sometimes just want to talk about everything? You know, there's days when you can just talk about anything. Need to sit back and chat about nothing at all? Nothing But Julie, coming at you with fun and creative topics and interviews.
Did you hear Julie's podcast? She's got the greatest topics.
Come join the chat about everything, anything, and nothing. So unwind and tune in to Nothing But Julie. Great topics and cool interviews with some pretty awesome people. And now, without further delay, here's Nothing But Julie.
Well, hello, everyone. It is your host, Julie Schrager of the Nothing But Julie podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. Just going to jump right in. I've always loved motivational speeches, but I've never been the kind of person that's like, oh, I can't wait to listen to this next, TED Talks or next motivational speech. It really depends on the mood I'm in. But as you might know, one of my favorite motivational talkers is Mel Robbins, and she used to write for CNN and, had a lot of different, jobs in kind of like a news networky type of position. And you might remember one of my podcasts, I had discussed her motivational speech, her TED Talk speech about how no one's there to pick you up and make you do the things you want to do and you're on your own, and stop waiting around for people to do that. And I absolutely fell in love with this other speech that she made years ago that I would like to discuss with you today. It really... the thing about Mel Robbins is that she's just very raw and in your face, and I think that's why people love her. She just tells you like it is, and you go and you listen to her, you're forced to hear the truth, and it's kind of like a punch in the gut. But it also makes you go, oh my God, yeah, that's me, or that's what's happened to me, or I can totally relate. And so I am going to be talking to you today about Mel Robbins' video that I am going to list in the description so you can watch the video as well, on why motivation is garbage. And wow is all I have to say. Probably one of the best speeches I've ever heard. And so here we go. People are lacking motivation, that word motivation. And she goes on to say, because that is what our minds are wired with. The fact that human beings, Mel Robbins says, we're not designed to do things that are uncomfortable or scary or difficult, because our brains are designed to protect us from those things, from the worst things. That's what our brain, according to her, is supposed to be doing. Now, I don't know physiologically if that's true. But this is what she says, that our brains are trying to keep us alive. And in order for us to change, she goes on to say, in order to be the best person that we want to be, the best spouse, the best in our business or our work or our lives, she says we're always going to face uncertainty. And it can always be scary, but that's what sets us up for this problem. That motivation is garbage, and you only feel motivated to do the things that are easy. Now, challenge yourself with that right there. Just challenge yourself. And I'm sure the first thing you're going to say is, I've done quite a few things that were difficult in my life. The question is, what did you do to get yourself there? Was it motivation? She goes on. She says that she knows why that is, because she's studied it so much. Because for her, one of the hardest things for her to figure out was why it was always so hard for her to do the little things that could improve her life, the little things. And what she realized was that our minds are designed to stop us at all costs from doing anything that can hurt us. Now, what none of us realize, she continues to go on to say, and again, a lot of this is coming from the transcript. So this is me kind of, talking about what I've listened in and what I've read. She says that it was a very hard thing for her to figure out, like, why was it so hard for her to improve her life and do these small things? And she said what she realized was that our minds are pretty much designed to stop us at all costs from doing anything that can hurt us, like I said. So the way that this pretty much happens is with the most subtle things that are so subtle that we never catch. And it becomes a habit. We become we become people who start with a habit of hesitating or hesitation. So, we have an idea. She says you could have this incredible idea, and instead of saying this idea, you stop, you hesitate. And what none of us realize is that when you hesitate, even for that moment, she calls it a micro moment, that small hesitation sends a stress signal to your brain. And that stress signal wakes up your brain. And it's all of a sudden saying, wait a minute, why is she hesitating? She didn't hesitate when she put on, her killer, heels, and didn't hesitate wearing a NASA t-shirt. And she's talking about Tom, the host. Your brain starts to go to work to protect you. It has a million different ways to protect you, Mel Robbins says. And one of them is called the spotlight effect. It's a known phenomenon where your brain magnifies risk. And why? She says it's to pull you away from something that it perceives to be a problem. You can trace every single problem in your life to hesitation. And she says that those are actually decisions. And what she does and what's changed her life is realizing that motivation is garbage. She's never going to feel like the things that are tough or difficult or uncertain or scary or new. So she has to stop waiting until she feels like it. She says that, and this got me, that she realized that she was one decision away from a totally different marriage and a totally different life and a totally different job, income, relationship with her kids. Not just like one decision, she says. Like I'm divorcing you in a marriage example, but one decision on, and you could be having a conversation with your spouse, and she says you feel your emotions rise up, and within a tiny window, those emotions, she says, can take over and can impact how your marriage goes. And you can learn how to take control of that micro moment and make a decision to act in a way that usually shifts your marriage. A micro decision, an infinitesimal time in your thinking, in the course of the seconds and minutes and hours in your day. That microsecond made up a life-altering decision that could have changed your entire life. And you can learn how to take control of that micro moment and make a decision, she says, to act in a way that actually shifts your marriage. And your life comes down to your decisions. And if you change your decisions, you'll change everything. And I know it's like, yeah, duh, but think back to some of the decisions you made. Like saying yes to your husband or your wife, or, how things could have shifted, how instead of deciding to do something you decided to be when you grew older, you decided to make a complete shift. Maybe you never would have met your significant other or had your children or had the home you live in, right? So the host, Tom, says the core concept comes through so powerfully in her book, which is phenomenal. And she goes on to discuss the story of Hal and the story behind her and NASA, which is what the 5-second rule is about. So Mel Robbins breaks it down. So she takes us back to this 5-second rule, which became her life's work. And it was all a gigantic mistake. She said it's been in her life now and her 20-year marriage, and everything that she does has to do with the 5-second rule. And she goes on to tell the story that when she was 41 years old, she was unemployed. Her husband started a restaurant business, which was his dream. Okay. And what then happened was, she was so excited. He started this business, and he did this restaurant. And when he got laid off from his job, actually, he decided just to open up this restaurant. And she was actually a bit relieved because, he was in high tech, and she felt that, she probably was not going to have to work or whatever she was relieved about, relieved because maybe he wanted to quit his job and instead he got laid off. Well, anyway, he says, I'm going to go into the restaurant business. And she goes on to say she looked at him and she said, listen, buddy, inspiration is for strangers. You get your butt back to that job and you pay the mortgage. Again, that micro moment. She's like, I'm being a jerk instead of being a supportive wife. And that was an example of where, when he said that he was not going to get a job, but he was going to start a business, the first thing that was there was fear. Fear was making the decision for her. And the restaurant was a home run. So clearly he opened the business. And what do you do when things are successful? She says, you grow it. And they decided to raise money. She threw in their home equity line, the kids' college savings. She said they tried to open a second and third, and at the same point, a grocery store chain. And she said that she encouraged her husband to go into wholesale. So it basically got way too big, too fast. And they wound up, having to close the businesses, and they came off so badly that it's called a Suncoast, which is a trick on our brain that our brains play on us, called Suncoast. When you throw a ton of time and a ton of money at something, it really is hard to let go of. But if you haven't done it in business, we all have a relationship in our past, she goes on to say. But by the time they closed the second restaurant, they were at an $800,000 loss. That's quite a bit of money. So she says that everything was gone. And she became terrified at the age of 41, feeling like a failure. And so did her husband. And she says, to make it worse, not only had they lost all their savings, but her friends and family members had invested. So there was this tension between the truth of what was happening and what you had to do in public because it was public business. Shame, she says, failure, embarrassment, and the lien on their house. So Mel Robbins goes on to say that the phone kept starting to ring because it was nothing but collection calls. And she remembers having this feeling of tremendous shame. And that at some point she thought, wow, we've all hit that moment in life where things are just not going how you thought they would go. And she says that's what's amazing about those moments, is that we respond differently. She said her husband would spring out of bed and he would head right out of the door at 6 o'clock in the morning, and he would go meet his partner, and they would go to the bank and they would dig right in and face their problems head on. She says he did not want to be in the house because she would wake up and she would just be a raging bitch. And at that point in their lives, that's pretty much how she was. And she said, it's because when you're scared and you're afraid and you're jealous and you're overwhelmed with emotions, she says it's so much easier to point the finger at other people. And again, that's another decision that we make. That's a decision, by the way, one, you may not be aware that you're making, but you are still making it. And what would happen to her was the opposite. If her husband would be gone, then, her alarm would go off at 6 a.m. and she would just lie there and think about the lien on the house and bankruptcy and what they were facing. And she would think about how much they had fought the night before and think about the fact that she was unemployed. And she would hit that snooze button over and over and over again. She was like, why do I need to get up? And this is my life. My life sucks. I'm tapped out. Why get up? But in the scheme of life, hitting the snooze button is not that big of a deal. But she says, here's the thing about life. We don't wake up and say, today is the day I destroy my life. What we usually do is we kind of check out because it feels overwhelming, or we check out because we're afraid, or we check out because we start listening to self-doubt. And then we make these teeny tiny decisions all day long and we don't realize it. Mel Robbins, she goes on to say that the decision to not get up on time, a decision to not eat the right thing, or to snap at your kids, or not to speak at a meeting, or not look for a job, or not call your parents. All day long you have these tiny decisions that take you so far off track, then you wake up like, I did. And you look at your life and think, how the hell did I get here? And more importantly, how do you get back over there? And you have no idea. She says that she was so strapped that she knew that there was more in store, but she couldn't figure out how to close this gap. How do you find that power that's in you, and how do you discover your greatness, and how do you solve these problems? It's all very overwhelming. She says that she would go to the grocery store and she would, at the end when she was going to pay, be readying her excuse because she knew there was no way that her card was going to clear. So she says she got into this struggle with herself that a lot of us do find ourselves, which is true, and that's why I'm going over this particular TED Talks, because it really was, not TED Talks, the video, it really was inspirational in the end. She says that we're all one Google search away from a list of instructions, right? You've all done that. You know what to do, but you can't seem to make yourself do it. And it'll change your life. So how do you get out of your head and stop thinking about what you need to do and actually do it? It's a very good question. She goes on to say that in her case, this stuff was pretty easy. She said, getting up on time, making breakfast for the kids, getting them on the bus, looking for a job, be nicer to her husband, don't drink so much. Instead of isolating yourself, you pick up the phone and call someone. You get out and you go for a walk. You start running again. Like all these little things that she was capable of doing but couldn't get out of here, could not get out of here. And if you're stuck, that's the problem. So she says you're in your head, you're thinking. And that is the universal problem. And it all starts with this knowledge of what to do, and then you hesitate and you think about it. You think about whether or not you feel like doing it. So for a couple of months, she was really stuck. Her husband would get up at 6 a.m. I'd hit the snooze, and the kids would miss the bus. Then every night I'd do the same thing. I'd go in bed. She said that she would have these nights, have you ever had these nights where, the night before you're going to bed, right? And you would say, all right, that's it. tomorrow it's the new me tomorrow, and tomorrow I'm going to get up on time, I'm going to go to the gym, I'm going to look for a job, blah, 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 blah. You make all these promises, right? And then you wake up the next morning and you're like, I don't feel like the new me. So that's why she thinks that motivation is garbage, because motivation is never there when you need it. So here's what happened to her with the NASA shirt, NASA, NASA space shirt. She says it's a really silly story, but it's a powerful one. Her husband had gone to bed and she was struggling, and they all had the same problems. They still had to lean on the house, facing bankruptcy, still fighting like crazy. She was still unemployed. They basically did not figure out the solution yet. And on the TV, she saw this rocket, and it was about to launch. And she thought, oh my gosh, that's it. I'm going to launch myself out of bed like a rocket ship, like NASA, right here, and launch me out of that bed. And I'm going to move so fast that I don't think I'm going to beat my brain. See, and rather than just laying there and waiting for the motivation to come or inspiration, before the self-doubt and everything kicked in, she was like, no, I am going to count backwards from 5 to 1, and I'm going to launch myself up out of bed before my brain has time to trick me out of it. She says that she talks a lot about instincts and inner wisdom, and that we can get into this little into it a little bit later, but a lot of us talk about the fact that, we have these gut feelings. And she says she's done a lot of research for the book that she made that's based on this video. And what she discovered is actually when you set your goals, when you have an intention on something that you want to change about your life, your brain helps you. What it does is it opens up a checklist, and then your brain goes to work, trying to remind you of that intention that you set. And she goes on to say that it's really important to develop the skill and say that word purposefully, the skill of knowing how to hear that inner wisdom and that intention kicking in and leaning into it quickly. So her brain was saying, that's it right there, move as fast as Rocket Mel, because she wanted to change her life. And she thinks that most people that are miserable or really dying to be great and dying to have more, and we want to change, we want to live a better life, we want to create more for our families, we want to be happier. The desire is there. Again, it's about how do you go from knowledge to action. Okay? The first thing in this story that's important, she says, is realizing that the answer was in her mind. And it was telling her, pay attention. She had, it was a funny story, which I won't talk about. But the next morning, her alarm goes off, and she pretends that NASA was there. And she literally went 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. She says she counted out loud, and then she stood up. And she says she will never forget standing there in her bedroom. It was dark, it was cold, it was winter in Boston. And for the first time in 3 months, she had beaten her habit of hitting the snooze button. She could not believe it and thought, wait a minute, counting backwards, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. But she did it the next morning. And the next morning, and the next morning. And it worked, and she started to notice something very interesting, that there were moments all day long, just like that 5-second moment in bed, where she knew what to do. And if she didn't move within those 5 seconds, her brain would step in and talk her out of it. And every human being has that 5-second window. Might even be shorter for others. But you have about a 5-second window in which you can move from idea to action before your brain kicks into full gear and sabotages any change in behavior. Pretty interesting, wouldn't you say, guys? Mel Robbins she's smart and she's well spoken, and she has a way of kind of just singling things out. And so she goes on to say, remember, your brain is wired to stop you from doing things that are uncomfortable or uncertain or scary, like mentioned earlier. And it's your job to learn how to move from those ideas that could change everything into acting on them in the smallest moment. Now, the host, Tom Bilyeu, says, for anyone right now at home, this is a quote, who is thinking like this sounds too simple, too easy, he says, talk a bit about your community, because reading some of the comments, it's crazy how many people like the sheer volume of the people you quote in your book. So she goes on to say one of the reasons she's so excited about the book is it's an idea that you can use. It's free. She goes on to say it's backed by science. More than 8 million people around the world have discovered it. You're talking about the number of people we've heard from than 100,000 people in 80 countries, she says, that are using this rule. She says that there are 11 people they know of who have stopped themselves from killing themselves using this rule. A guy by the name of Steve wrote to her. He was a veteran, and he was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, and he boarded a ferry overseas with the intention to jump over. He walked over the railing, and his inner wisdom kicked in, his inner wisdom. And it was in that moment, the 5-second rule, counting from 5 to 1, backwards, he did it, and he moved away from the railing, asked for help, and got his life saved. So there is, a little food for thought there. And his story has been inspired by countless other people that heard her in the speeches, which is an amazing thing. And had she ever thought that she would find herself 8 years after discovering it, spending her days telling people about the 5-second rule? She said, first of all, I would have picked a different name because it reminds you of the one where you have to pick up food in 5 seconds off the floor. So she would have come up with something different, a different title than the 5-second rule. But she said it was my secret weapon. It was something I did that I never intended to tell anybody. And she went from getting up on time and waking up on time to shaking up her entire life. Because when you understand the power of a 5-second decision, and you understand that you always have a choice to go from autopilot to decision maker, everything in your life will change. You'll be a different negotiator. You will be different in sales. You'll be unstoppable in the gym because you'll realize the amount of garbage that you put in the way of your hopes, your dreams, your potential, and your confidence, and your courage. Everything comes down to that one decision you make. And there are a plethora of those decisions throughout the day, and you don't realize how those decisions have shaped your life and will continue to shape your life. Mel Robbins goes on to say that we all know what to do, that none of us know how to make ourselves do. And she started to research, why does something so stupid work? Why? Why does something so silly create such powerful and profound change? Here is why. The rule is a form of metacognition, which is a fancy pants term that means something is real simple. You can outsmart your own brain in furtherance of goals. Let me say that again. Metacognition means something real simple. You can outsmart your brain into furtherance of your goal or your goals. And there are tricks that you can use that actually outsmart the tricks your brain plays on you. She goes on to say, in furtherance of a higher purpose, we all know this. You can restrain yourself if you are in a situation that calls for it. You can jump into a raging river to save your dog or your kid. You can direct yourself in ways if it's important to you. The rule, what it does is it does something really remarkable. When you count backwards, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, what you're actually doing is you're interrupting what researchers call habit loops. And these habit loops get encoded as close to loop patterns in your basal ganglia. That's the part of the brain where your feelings, where your emotions, every habit that you have, which is nothing more than behavior that you repeat, that you don't even think about. She says, when you count backwards from 5, it interrupts what's going on in your brain. That's spinning without you thinking, and it moves and awakens your prefrontal cortex. When you hit 1, your habit has been interrupted. So you've interrupted self-doubt, you've interrupted maybe snapping at your kids, you've interrupted the desire to grab a drink, you've interrupted procrastination. But you've also, by counting backwards, done an action, she says. It awakens your prefrontal cortex. That is the part of the brain that's awake when you are changing behavior, when you're learning new things. When you hit 1, it's also a prompt. She says, in the language of research, you'll hear people talking about starting rituals. That's something that's proven to help you learn a new habit. So the 5-second rule, when you repeat it, it becomes a starting ritual that triggers you to act with confidence. And it triggers you that this is a moment for courage. That triggers you to shift gears because you've also done the manual work of awakening the part of the brain that you need to change. You've set yourself up for success. She says it doesn't work if you count up, because you can keep going and counting up and going and going. And it doesn't require a lot of focus, but you can't, if you count backwards from 5 to 1, it again awakens the prefrontal cortex and it prompts you to move. So when you start to use it and then you read about it, you'll see that it's being used all over the place. They use it in the armed services in order to align troops and get them to start an exercise. They use it in elementary school, like at big assemblies to get a huge room full of kids to stop talking. And because it requires you to focus, it's not a habit. Ooh, how profound. Let me say that again. Because it requires you to focus, it's not a habit. Robbins goes on to say it will become a habit that prompts you to have confidence and courage, but in the beginning, it interrupts patterns of behavior that you do on autopilot, and it helps you assert control, and it teaches you how to become the kind of person that moves from thinking about something to actually doing it. Such an incredible video. Me talking about it, I don't think it speaks volumes more on her actually talking about it herself. But I had to discuss it because it really is very motivational, just hearing her speak. And what's incredible, Robin says, is that in 5 seconds, self-doubt can take over and rob you of your power and rob you of your joy and rob you of your potential. Or in 5 seconds flat, you can actually use one stupid little trick to push yourself to grab it. Okay? She said that she wasn't going to tell anybody about this because it was so stupid. And it also worked. So it was my thing, she says. Not your thing, my thing. See, the real thing that happened for me, and this is something that is a real important topic for me, she says, is that there is, when you talk about personality, so extroverts, introverts, a lot of us really, and I know I did this, she said. I was all wrong about what confidence meant. I thought confidence was a personality trait. She said she thought that people that are outgoing are the confident ones, and the truth is confident is not a personality trait at all. Confidence is a skill. A lot of the extroverted people, she says, that are actually very insecure. I used to become them. I used to be kind and kind of bossy and, a loudmouth, and didn't believe in myself and didn't believe in my ideas, she says. There's a tremendous number of introverted people that feel uncomfortable putting the attention on themselves, but they are very, very confident in their ideas, she says. They definitely believe in themselves. When you start to separate confidence not as a matter of personality, but as a skill that you can acquire, because confidence is the ability to move, in her opinion, from thought to action. Because when you are a confident person, you believe enough in yourself and your capability that you're willing to try, that you're willing to share, she says. To me, confidence isn't the assuredness that it turns out. It's the willingness to try. And that was a huge insight for her. What a lot of people don't know about her, although I share this on stage, and she's extremely open about the topic, is that it's very important to her that the single most profound use of the 5-second rule is mind control. And she says that a lawyer will tell you that you can use this trick to cure anxiety. Isn't that an interesting thing to say? She says she struggled with anxiety her entire life, and she defines it as the habit of worrying spiraled out of control. And you might say that you're a worrier. That's not true. You have a habit of worrying. Robbins says a habit is a pattern of behavior or thinking that you repeat without realizing it. And anxiety happens when that pattern of worrying about things spirals out of control, and that it starts to marry and manifest itself with physical sensations too. So those of you that have had anxiety, you know that feeling. She says that personally, she struggled with anxiety most of her life, and it became quite acute when she was in her late teens and early 20s, and she medicated herself in the middle of law school. She took Zoloft for 2 decades, and she had postpartum depression and panic, and it became so bad that not only was she medicated and couldn't breastfeed, but she couldn't be left alone with her daughter. And she says you can cure yourself of anxiety, but she doesn't say it lightly. 4 years ago, she said, after I had been using the 5-second rule to change my behavior, how I spoke to my husband, how I negotiated in business, so on and so forth, she wondered if she could use that 5-second rule to get control of her thought patterns. Not her behavior patterns, her thought patterns. And she realized that you can. That we're going to build this conversation because she wants to start with something that we can all relate to. And that is, how do you stop worrying? And how do you stop listening to self-doubt? And this is how you're going to do it. She says all day long, you're going to have moments where your thoughts drift, and she uses that word on purpose because she says, for me, there's a physical sensation when you start to use the 5-second rule and you start to wake up, not only on time in the morning, but you wake up to the life and the opportunities in your life. And there is, you have your thoughts and they drift, and you'll just be hanging out with your friends. And then suddenly you're like, I'm not sure that person likes me anymore. Or I haven't heard from my kids lately. I wonder if they're dead. And it's because it's a habit. You're just worrying about stuff because it's become a habit. And when you're not paying attention, your brain shifts from you being a decision maker and paying attention to you just spending things on autopilot or spending time thinking about things because you're constantly on autopilot. And one of your habits is worrying. Think about it. Maybe you've drifted off from the things I've been saying. Where has your brain gone? What has it been thinking? And as soon as you wake up and you notice, you're like, Wow, I'm really talking some negative garbage to myself right now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You just shifted the part of your brain from the basal ganglia, which is where your habit loops are spinning, and you have awakened your prefrontal cortex. And you've also interrupted the pattern. This is actually very conducive to what some psychologists teach to those that might have, let's say, OCD. Mel Robbins goes on to say that what you're going to do, because your mind is actually ready to receive a different thought because of the counting, now you can put in an anchor thought. Like if you have a mantra, if you have a vision about the way your business is going to turn out in 5 years, if you just have a thought that makes you really happy and proud, insert that. Now, why does this work? She asks. Because of the counting. She says, we know that based on research, the positive thinking is not effective, believe it or not. In some instances, she said, trying to force yourself to think positive can actually make the worries worse. Because it's really hard to change the channel. What we have to do first is basically interrupt it and turn off the TV. Then turn it back on when the prefrontal cortex awakens. So the counting is essential. You can start using the counting today. If you catch yourself talking garbage to yourself, because we all know if she were to put a speaker on your head and broadcast, you wouldn't be sitting here in the audience. You'd be hearing everything that's going on in your brain. So she says that the problem is we listen to it. You'll be in a sales meeting and you'll be undermining yourself. They're not going to buy it. Oh my gosh, I'm in trouble. You aren't even present. Right? These are things that have happened to you guys before. You have to get back to that vision that you have about toasting your success, or this customer being really happy, or being proud of yourself. Whatever that vision may be, you can control your thoughts. And this is not just talking about this, that it's a tool that you can use, she says. She goes on to say, let's take it a step further. So worrying, if you let it go unchecked, what will happen is you'll get used to worrying. You'll get used to living in a state where you are slightly agitated all the time. And she goes on to talk about agitation. And she says that, okay, sorry, I just got lost a second. She says that based on research, is that physically in your body, so physiologically, in other words, being excited is the same exact thing as being afraid. She says, let me say that again. In your body, being excited is the same thing as being afraid. Your body doesn't know the damn difference. And your heart races, and your armpits sweat, and you may get tight, like some kind of tightness in your throat. What does that all mean? What's that all going to do? Well, she says the only difference between excitement and fear is what your brain says. And the problem is, if you have a habit of worrying, guess what you're going to tell yourself is going on, that you're freaking out? That you are not excited, that something must be wrong. Why would I say something like this? And she says, even when I became a speaker for a living, I would be on CNN. I'd first start doing it and be freaking out backstage. And even though, like just last week, she would go on stage in front of 8,000 people, she would still get crazy nervous. She goes, no, now I'm excited because I developed a technique and research out of Harvard, not based on my technique, but something very similar, proves that if you basically, right before you're about to do something, take a test, run a race, do some public speaking. Whatever it may be that gets your heart racing, she says, just do this and go, I'm excited. I'm excited to give that speech. I'm excited to ask him or her. I'm excited to do this race. Whatever happens is you give your brain context so your brain doesn't escalate the stuff going on in your body. your brain is not worried. Make sense? So she goes on to say that you can combine this with the 5-second rule. We know how to do worrying. You catch your thoughts through a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 anchor thought. If you start to feel your heart racing, you count backwards from 5 to awaken the prefrontal cortex and then start going, I'm really excited to do this. Another technique you can use is ask, I think they call it interrogatory questions, where instead of giving yourself a pep talk, she says, you should say, well, why I'm ready to do this? Why am I ready? Because that will force you to answer the question, which then convinces you, I'm ready to close this sale. Why am I ready to give this speech? Why am I ready? Those are two strategies that you can use backed by science that are proven to actually make your performance be much better. She says to take it a step further to anxiety, which is what happens when the habit of worrying spins out of control. Your body gets really agitated, and then you allow your mind to escalate it into a full-blown panic attack. And for those of you that have not had the pleasure of having a panic attack, she says, this is what it's like. Have you ever been in your car and you're driving down the road and you go to change lanes and all of a sudden there is like a car right there and you swerve a little bit and you get your heart is like, crazy and you may sweat a little bit. You go grip the wheel really tight and you're super locked in on the road ahead of you. Then that car pulls away and the near miss scenario passes and your mind starts going, okay, you're all right. That's what a panic attack is like. It happens usually right in front of your coffee pot, she says. So she goes on to say that you have the same, oh my God, and your heart's racing. And the problem for your brain is that your brain can't look around and say, holy cow, we almost got hit by a car. Your brain is saying, what the hell is wrong with her? She is making coffee and she's freaking out. That's pretty funny. So anyway, I lost my train of thought because I thought that was pretty funny. Okay, so she says, your brain is the problem because that's our brain's job. It's designed for it to protect us. Just like she said at the beginning, your brain will now do whatever it can to magnify the problem. Okay, and remember we discussed the spotlight effect. It will start telling you all kinds of crazy stuff because it can't figure out contextually what the hell is going on. She's just making coffee, now her heart is racing. A lot of people that have panic attacks say, I think I'm dying. Oh my God, what's happening? Or you see them do the deer in the headlights thing where they get out of the room and it's the spotlight effect in your brain now taking control and magnifying everything to get you out of whatever it is. So this is how you use the second rule. She says you use it to stabilize your thoughts before the panic escalates. Then what happens is it drifts into worry, and then it disappears. The second you feel worried, you catch it. You train yourself to do that. If you start feeling yourself getting your heat racing, your heart racing, you can count backwards from 5 and use the I'm excited. Now, if that doesn't work, literally count down from 5 and just give yourself an anchor thought, literally, of you being okay. She gives another quick example that she says she's had a number of successes with. She used to be terrified of flying, terrified every bump, she'd be freaking out. And so she started to use this strategy with the plane. So the second you feel yourself getting nervous, you count backwards from 5, and then your anchor thought is a vision of what you are going to do when you get to where you are going. So when she gets on the plane tomorrow to fly back to Boston, she'll think about walking in the house and that place is a disaster. And it'll look like everybody's stuff got loaded into a can and then fired all over the first floor. And if we hit turbulence, she'll count back from 5 to 1 and think about that vision. Because cognitively for her brain, if she's walking in the house and it's a disaster, the plane made it. See? That's the power of this. It's incredible. You know, guys, this reminds me of what was that? The movie with Denzel Washington, and he was a conductor of a train, Pelham 123, I think. Well, and it was with John Travolta, and his wife knew that he was the person who was going to deliver the money to John Travolta and that he could possibly get killed. And so her way of convincing her brain for him to come, that he was going to make it and come back home, was to tell him to get a gallon of milk. He at the time didn't get it or understand why she said it, but I understood it. And that's why this means so much, that if you set an anchor vision, once anything happens, like she said, turbulence, you count back from 5 to 1, you think about the house being a mess, you think about the anchor thought, and what it does is it tricks your brain into believing that you are going to make it. To me, that's incredible. So there's not a whole lot left to talk about. I'm going to conclude with something that she says, that it's about her impact. And Mel Robbins says that the impact that she wants to have is that she wants to teach people how to discover the power that's inside of them, to live fully in the open and share themselves, who they are not. Like, there is so much fear that we live with, and she wants to teach people how to live with more courage, because courage is nothing more than the ability to do things that are uncertain. And in today's world, we have the internet. You can literally learn and launch and do anything, and the only thing that's truly stopping you are the limiting patterns that you think, the self-doubt, the fear, the habits that you have, and you can break them. You can break them 5 seconds at a time. And she wants to teach people a simple way to discover the power that's locked inside them, and then to unleash it and go out and live their lives that they've always dreamed of. And that is pretty much Mel Robbins in a nutshell, and what this video was about. I am going to put the website where you can, well, it's YouTube, but I will put it in the description so you can listen to it. And I promise you, you will not be disappointed. It is probably right up there with some of the best Tony Robbins motivational speeches, because you don't realize that in the truth, in the in-your-face rawness of her truth, it all of a sudden brings some light to what we're all going through in at some point in our lives. And she's in your face, and you cannot escape the truth of it. And that's what's so great about it. And so it is with that I wish you a phenomenal rest of your week. And if you are listening to this on another day or time other than a Wednesday, I wish you a happy day. And thanks so much, as usual, I say, to my fans out there. I know you're not fans, but my listeners. I thank you so very much from the bottom of my heart for listening to me and for DMing me. You guys are incredibly supportive. And if it wasn't for you, I would not have continued to keep doing this. Feel free to listen to me. Aside from Spotify, you can listen to me on any other streaming platforms. And also, you can catch me at Nothing But Julie on Instagram and Facebook. I very rarely go on Twitter, so you'll probably not find me doing much on there. Thanks again, everyone.